Is the Nissan Leaf still relevant in 2022? Or is that CHAdeMO charging connector too much of an issue? Today I'm at the GRIDSERVE Electric Forecourt in Braintree, where as part of their test drive experience I'm going to be driving this Nissan Leaf. Some people say Tesla were the real pioneers of the EV industry, but I think, at least to some extent, Nissan could claim that title. There are loads of Leafs on the road. Sometimes people say, well, you probably shouldn't buy one. You won't be able to charge it, CHAdeMO's dying out. I don't think that's true at all. But what's it like, and should you consider buying one? So here we are then in the Nissan Leaf. And for a lot of people, I would say this is where the EV experience began. Maybe not in this particular model, which I'll say is a brand new current model, 40 kilowatt hour Leaf. But certainly the Mark 1, I think, changed EV ownership in this country forever. It was the first sort of proper car from an actual manufacturer that was a massive step change from crap like, you know, the G-Wiz and all that, which weren't really, you know, proper cars. The Leaf gives you everything you want. It's a hatchback. It seats 5. It feels, looks like a proper car. And I think especially this Mark II model, even more so. It lost a little bit of the crazy, oh, look at me, I'm futuristic and electric look that the Mark I Leaf had, which, you know, the looks weren't for everyone. And it gives you a car that just looks like any other hatchback, really. If there's one of these following you in traffic, you would easily mistake it for other Nissan models in the range. And as I've often said, that's actually a good thing. Not everybody needs an EV that shouts about the fact that it's an EV. But the Leaf's got every reason to shout about it, because at the end of the day, this was the car that started it all. Nissan, as they launched the Leaf in the UK, then obviously built what is now the famous, or helped build, now the famous Electric Highway, now owned by GRIDSERVE, who have provided this car that I'm showing for you today. And for a lot of people, it meant that they could buy a car. It was viable to buy a Leaf, travel the motorway, charge at motorway services, and there was actually infrastructure that would enable them to do that. Now, what your opinion might be of the electric highway since then, the GRIDSERVE are doing a great job of turning it around. What your opinion might have become in the era of broken chargers and too much demand and all that stuff, back in the day, but you know, the early 2010s, it really was revolutionary, and loads of people were buying a Leaf and motoring for free, because you could charge for free, and embracing electric motoring. And that was with an early Leaf with a 24 kilowatt hour battery. Not that much range when it was new, a lot less range now. But what is this model like? The 40 kilowatt hour, I mean, a lot of people might be of the opinion that it's a bit old hat now, and you should be looking at something that's a bit more modern, but I disagree. So let's take this one for a drive and see what it's like, shall we? First thing you notice about the Leaf is it does just feel like you're in just a normal car. It doesn't really feel like an EV, despite all the history Nissan have of innovation, which as I say, is a good thing. I'm a big fan of EVs that don't necessarily feel strange, feel different. Performance-wise, I mean, it's alright, it gets up to speed reasonably well. I would say that it was a little bit slower perhaps than some of its competition these days, but it'll certainly surprise you if you're used to, you know, a typical hatchback with a reasonably small engine. I think I'm spoilt driving EVs that are maybe a little bit more frantic than this one is, but it's certainly no slouch. It gets down the road well enough, and that's all you want, really. So this is the 40 kilowatt hour model. I think a range of around 170 miles is probably on the money. It's currently saying on the dash that it'll do 190 miles with a pretty much full charge to just over 90%. I think that might be a little bit optimistic, but you never know. There is a 62 kilowatt hour version if you need that bit extra range. If you want to regularly go just a bit further, the 62 might be the one for you. For those worried about charging, I mean, I think this whole CHAdeMO's on the way out thing, I mean, it's not, is it? Charger operators are still installing chargers with CHAdeMO. CCS is the go-to standard and everything else uses it, but CHAdeMO connectors are still being installed. Perhaps sometimes they're not being installed in a 1-to-1 ratio with CCS. GRIDSERVE have their own strategy for that, which they're rolling out. You know, they've decided based on the sort of the market share and stuff what's sensible to only provision a certain percentage of CHAdeMO connectors, and I don't really see the problem with that. I think you will still need to be able to charge. You might want to think about staying away from the busier motorway locations because there's a chance you might need to wait. But then I think there's a chance you need to wait in any car. I don't think having a CHAdeMO equipped car is a particularly bad thing that means you're not going to be able to charge. And I think people are maybe taking that a little bit over the top, I think, when they talk about it. It wouldn't put me off. What maybe would put me off buying a Leaf would be the sort of thermal characteristics of the battery. It doesn't have active cooling, passively air cooled, and that can cause issues on longer journeys. So if you're on journeys where you need to make sort of consecutive rapid charges, it's well known that the battery does get a little bit warm if you're driving on the motorway at 70 miles an hour for an extended period of time, and then you've got to stop and rapid charge, and then you back on the motorway, and then you stop again and rapid charge. The charge rate does slow down quite a lot, which is in a direct sort of contradiction to cars that do have like water cooling, where the charging rate can actually get faster if the battery's a bit warmer. And that can be a problem. People call it rapid gate. And it can be a problem if the Leaf is a car you want to buy to make regular longer journeys. I would say if that was the case, you probably want to think about the 62 kilowatt hour model. More likely to satisfy your needs, but I don't think that ruling out the Leaf completely based on the thermal issues is a great idea, unless, if you are pounding the motorway network every day and you're making long journeys every day and you're rapid charging several times a day, maybe it's not for you. But then I do know that there are people using these as taxis across the country, and they will be rapid charging a few times a day, and I haven't heard that it's suddenly not suitable for that kind of work. So I think people blow it out of proportion, just like people, I think, blow the CHAdeMO connector availability stuff out of proportion. I just don't think it's quite as big an issue as people are making out. But all in all, what do you get? You get a fairly well screwed together cabin. It feels reasonably good in here for what is not, a particularly premium car. I would say the door cards maybe feel a little bit cheap, but everything else feels like it's pretty well made and well knocked together by the guys in Sunderland. You get a fairly competent car, handles reasonably well. The ride's okay. It doesn't bounce around. It's not too firm. It's not too soft. I think it's all right. And you do, like, most importantly, I think you get like a proper, hatchback. And if that's what you want, if you want something to replace like an old, diesel Golf or something like that, then you can't go far wrong with this. It doesn't need to be a big SUV. It doesn't need to be weird and wonderful. You can just get a normal hatchback that'll do everything you need, and it'll provide that sort of family car for you without it having to be the size of a small country or anything like that. And I do think it's a really good shout. And I think if you're regularly going to drive sort of within its range, then you don't even need to worry about charging issues and is there enough CHAdeMO, and is the thermal management good enough and all that stuff. You don't even need to think about it because it'll do everything you need to do. If you can charge it at home, what more do you want? I definitely still think there's a very good place for the Leaf in the market. They're relatively cheap as well to lease. I think compared with some other cars out there, I quite often see lease deals on the Leaf. And in this world of massive long lead times and stock availability, they seem to be reasonably available too. You might have a little bit of a wait, but they don't seem to be suffering quite the same shortages as everybody else. You seem to be able to get your hands on them. And there's a lot to be said for that. If you need something reasonably soon and these are available, then why not? I think it gets a lot of bad press, and I'm not quite sure why. Based on this relatively short test drive, I'm not quite sure why so many people turn their nose up at the Leaf and say, well, I really don't like that. You'd be better off with a Tesla. Let's not forget the fact this is actually a fair bit cheaper, and it doesn't cost 500 quid a month to lease and all that kind of stuff, which means I think it is a very compelling proposition. It'll be very interesting to see what the likes of the MG4 does to sales of the Leaf. So Nissan are at least continuing to sell it for now, and I suspect the two will be available at the same time once the MG4 becomes available. Now I see them as being sort of directly in competition with each other. The MG4, a very similarly sized hatchback, aimed at a very similar part of the market, and therefore I could see people buying an MG4 instead of a Leaf, or vice versa. Now, you're always going to get people that might do that based on badge, or based on where a particular car is made, or those sort of characteristics. But ignoring those, it'll be very interesting to see how they go head to head. This was a very short test drive of the Nissan Leaf, and I quite like what I see. I don't know if it would be quite enough for me to decide if I wanted to buy one or not. I'd probably need to take a little bit longer. But I'm a bit limited in time today, just because I'm driving cars back to back in quite quick succession, and I don't have loads and loads of time to do that. But if you want to decide what car is right for you, then coming along to test drive at one of the GRIDSERVE Electric Forecourts, I think, is a great way to do that. You just book online, either at Braintree or at Norwich. You can turn up and you can do the test drives, and you can test multiple vehicles if you want to. I just think it's a really good way to decide what's right for you and what's not, without having to suffer the sales spiel of the dealership, the sort of incorrect information you sometimes get from salesmen at dealerships, or perhaps they'll be trying to sell you a petrol or diesel car instead. There will be none of that. And I just think it's such a good opportunity for you to decide what's right for you, and work out whether an EV even works for you. But even if you've already answered that question, which one you might be interested in. Quite a large number of cars available, and availability does vary, but it's all on the website. You can book in, you can do these test drives, and I just think it's such a brilliant way to do things. But to answer the question at the start of the video, is the Nissan Leaf still relevant in 2022? Absolutely yes, it is. Would I consider buying one if I had the requirements that would facilitate one? Absolutely, yes, I would. I think it's definitely worth looking at, and I definitely don't think that you should discount it automatically just because of any preconceptions you might have about, oh, it's being old technology or anything like that. Definitely worth a look, and why not come along and test drive one, make your mind up for yourself, and don't just listen to what people say on the internet.